Hello and welcome to Daily Confetti with Carter and Keri on Unsafe Space. Today is Monday, July 15th. And I have been in a news blackout for the past 4 days. I have no idea what to talk about or what we're going to talk about. What about you, Carter?
I've not been in as much of a news blackout as you have. There's a lot to talk about. We got to just pick one topic, though, for this show. And I think it's unavoidable. We can't really avoid this thing that happened in Washington, although I'm not sure you even know what happened in Washington. So
no, I'm looking it up right now.
Okay, well, look up this guy's name, Willem Van Spronsen. So we've been talking about Antifa for a while, obviously, and we've cited CNN and other politicians, and CNN and other media outlets and politicians on the left who have endorsed Antifa and at the very least whitewashed what Antifa is doing, if not outright endorsed them. And on Saturday, an Antifa member in Oregon, so I don't know if you know this, Keri, but there was proposed ICE raids across the country this weekend, and it was for people who already had orders to leave, but they hadn't done anything or whatever, and so the ICE was going to go collect people. I don't think they got many people. I think announcing you're going to have a raid is probably retarded because guess what? People weren't home. At least that's what I read about the New York raid. Anyway.
You don't give people a heads up.
Right. Yeah. But anyhow, they were planning these raids and obviously Antifa is very against these raids, and there were a lot of protests. Well, this one guy, Willem Van Spronsen, who has been part of Antifa up there, he's part of a couple different groups, which we'll get into in a moment, but he decided to take matters into his own hands, and he got a rifle, an AR-15 actually, and some, quote, firebombs. I'm not sure what exactly that means. I don't know how homemade they were or what, but firebombs and a rifle, and he went to the ICE detention center in Tacoma at about 4 a.m. on Saturday and attempted to, I don't know what he's trying to do, blow things up, disrupt things, free people, just make a statement, whatever it was. And he got into a firefight with police and was killed. And no one else was injured that I'm aware of. And this is bad enough, I guess, but the responses and...
Are they treating him like a martyr?
Yeah, they are. So let's walk through some things, Keri, first. So I got some stuff I can pull up. First of all, he was a member of the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club. Now, you know that Antifa has been encouraging people to arm. So here's the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club page. We believe in active resistance to the corrosive and destructive social effects of white supremacy, sexism, bigotry, and economic exploitation. We stand in defense of well-being of the community. So here's their so edgy, an anti-swastika sign. You guys are so edgy.
Make sure you guys know we're anti-fascists, although we behave like fascists.
We don't like Nazis. That makes us special.
But we are Nazis.
Yeah. So we organize against fascism, which of course is anyone who isn't a Marxist. We train in defense. So there's some pictures of some people with some firearms, a couple carbines. We work with our community, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at their blog, they posted the next day here. Let me make it bigger. It's a rest in power. You've said this before, Keri. Mm-hmm. They use rest in power, not rest in peace.
Mm-hmm. Well, now you're seeing it.
Here you go. Rest in power, Will. Early in the morning of Sunday, July 13th, Willem Van Spronsen, a former member of Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club, was killed in an altercation at a facility adjacent to the Northwest Detention Center.
Hold on just 1 second. Sorry, I was swallowing part of a burrito. I just want to point that out. For people who haven't watched before and don't know what we're talking about, that's an SJW thing, rest in power. That's what they worship. They don't say rest in peace. Peace isn't important to them. everything about their ideology is about power, and that's what they want. And so when someone dies, they think this is a nice thing to say to someone about someone. Rest in power. So weird. Okay, thanks for letting me get kind of.
It is super odd. All right, so here, let's put this back. We're stunned, shocked, and saddened by his death. Will was known for his kindness, gentleness, and warm heart. He was a father, folk singer, and friend. Horrible folk singer, by the way. I watched some of his folk songs. God. Jeez. It was really bad. Will cared deeply about making the world. And by the way, this is someone who, I'm not that against folk songs. I can go to the local crappy coffee shop and listen to shitty folk songs. But this guy, Will cared deeply about making the world a better place, and he felt injustice towards others as personal as a wound. He took direct action to protest traditionally marginalized and threatened communities. Blah, blah, blah. We're mourning. We'll find a way to grapple with his loss and honor his memory. Will often talked about being useful. If you need to take something away from his action, we hope that it's if the rest of us were all more useful towards compassion and justice, then he could have stayed with us. So not an overt, it's pretty supportive of his actions, but not completely overt. But we can always move to the other group he was a member of, Puget Sound anarchists. And here we have another very similar obituary. Early this morning, friend and comrade Will was shot and killed. Basically, don't trust the story because cops suck.
I hate the way they say comrade, like completely openly, like have.
Here we go, though, Keri. This is your favorite one. We find his actions inspiring.
Wow. Okay.
So.
But how's the mainstream media? Are they treating him like a martyr?
We don't need to go into this anymore. Yeah. Well, let's do a little bit of background here. First of all, there has been. I've not seen AOC. What's the word she uses that she says Trump has to, or people have to disavow Trump's racist remarks about this or that. I've seen no disavowing. That has not happened. But there's a few more things I want to quickly say. In mainstream media, actually, we can say this. You know this guy, Keri? W. Camu Bell? I don't know him. He's a
that's my old client. You're surprising me. I used to represent this guy.
Well, he is a complete tool.
He is a tool. He is a disingenuous tool. He is one of the most fake SJWs I've ever met. Like, he wears it like a mask.
Well, here we go. From May this year, he said, "Are you watching the United Shades episode about Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club and the good work they're doing to actively end white supremacy? Just understand that being on my show is bringing a lot more harassment their way. Do what you can to support them." So he's been supporting the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club, who helped radicalize, train, and arm this guy.
He also spoke at some of the Antifa marches that against the Patriots for Prayer rallies. Yeah, he's been openly like, that doesn't surprise me. But you surprised me.
And so one more, by the way. Here's Seattle Antifist Action. When our good friend and comrade Willem Van Spronsen took a stand against fascist detention center in Tacoma, he became a martyr who gave his life for the struggle against fascism. Blah, 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 blah. So that's how he's being treated by the fascists. But I think it's important to point out a few things here, Keri. First, we have been told just on a few days ago, beginning of the month, July 1st, this article, Tim Pool pointed this out. I think this was the one Tim Pool was talking about, but I'm not sure. Vox had an article about how the left should arm. And it's odd because this article, some of it, I think libertarian type people will agree with the sentiment of some of this article. But he basically says, I'm of the firm opinion that it's it's time to not only arm the left, but challenge the narrative that all leftists are anti-gun, right? And he says kind of he understands the position, but guns are very important, and this is the only way we can overthrow the government, basically. By the way, he also calls there's a prevailing narrative that pegs guns and armed self-defense exclusively to Republicans, racist libertarians, and other generally Constitution-obsessed weirdos. So that's objective. So this person says he goes up with guns. Basically, we should arm. I don't want to get into too much. This person does make some good points so that other people, I think, will understand. We can't depend on the police to protect us. That is true. We do need guns. Also, he points out that the NRA has not been a pro-gun organization. They've supported lots of gun grabbing. He points out that gun grabbing was done. Yes, it was done by a lot of Republicans, and that it has racist undertones. He's correct about that. So gun laws can be motivated by racism. And the NRA has not been supportive of gun rights throughout history. So there's some, interesting things that this person mentions. But the point is, he is arguing explicitly that the left should arm themselves so that they can basically revolt and protect, quote, marginalized communities and whatever else. Last thing before we just talk about this a little bit more. Hold on here.
So this was a thing that started happening, I saw anyway, in my world after the election. After Trump won, I even had people on the left come and ask me, people who had been kind of critical of the fact that I was in a girls' gun club and stuff like that before, who came and asked me after he won if I would teach them how to shoot. Because suddenly they wanted to be able to, as if, I don't know, they just became more open to shooting, to firearms. So this is interesting, but.
Yeah. And the one other just piece of information I think you might need before we have, dive into this discussion a little bit more, Keri, is, we talk about esoteric, it's not always esoteric, but we talk about universities and education, and we rail against philosophy, and this is why this culture is bad, and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times it seems disconnected from, maybe to some people it seems disconnected from real life consequences, really things that actually happen in reality. So I want to point something out here. This is from this guy's, he left a little bit of a kind of a manifesto to some friends. He mailed them a letter. I'm just going to read part of it towards the end. He says, let me expand this a little bit. Don't let your silly government agencies spend money investigating this one. I was radicalized in civics class at 13 when we were taught about the Electoral College. It was at that point that I decided the status quo might be a house of cards. Further reading confirmed in the positive. He also cites Zim's famous People's History of the U.S., which is kind of a leftist, but part of the normal curriculum, leftist history and leftist perspective on the history of the U.S. He describes that hey, everyone should use ARs because they're cheap. That's what I did, blah, blah, blah. But he was radicalized in public school. That's where he was radicalized by his own words. So the reason that I care about education, the reason that I bitch about the philosophy behind and the culture behind a lot of the educational institutions that we talk about is this. This is what it leads to. It's this mindset. This is what happens. So this guy's proof. So Keri, that's all the kind of facts I think to get you up to speed on stuff. Just so you know, he was part of Andy Ngo actually filmed this guy. He was part of the crowd, the Antifa crowd. I don't think he personally attacked Andy, but the other week when Andy was attacked up in Washington, this guy was there and he's on film.
They don't like you reading these reasons why people do stuff, whether it's someone on the Antifa or whoever. They don't like you knowing any of the psychology behind why a person would do something like this, I think.
They don't. But I think I don't think this is getting, so this is a little bit depressing to me because I don't think this is getting better. I don't think this is going to end where, you know, we're very near, or sorry, we're very still far away from the election next year. If Trump wins again, this is just going to be escalated. I expect more and more violence here. And
if Trump wins again, they are going to be, yes, I think they will become even more violent.
Well, and he's being made a martyr. They are, you know, it's similar. It reminds me similar to what like ISIS cells or the Al Qaeda cells or whatever would say about, hey, this guy went and blew people up. He was a martyr, and you all should do the same thing. That's basically the message that's being given to radical leftists right now. You all should do the same thing. If we all did the same thing, the world would be a better place. That's what they're arguing. So I don't think this is going to get any better, Keri.
No, I don't know. I don't have much intelligent thing to add about it. Do you have any?
I have a general thought, because I don't think so I read his manifesto, which is not very long and not super coherent, but there's a grain of truth to a lot of this stuff, right? This is like, my daughter was asking me about what Occupy Wall Street was over the weekend. And I had to explain that like there's legitimacy to Occupy Wall Street. There's a pushback against something legitimate. It's just they're pushing back against the wrong thing, but they've identified some real problems. And so I think this is kind of related, because some of the things he complains about are kind of true. And look, we used to be a very limited government that was focused just on protecting individual rights, or at least we were much closer to that. I don't think we ever did that perfectly, obviously, but at least that was kind of the goal. And as the state grows, it doesn't just grow in one direction or another. It doesn't just grow towards fascism or just towards socialism and communism. It expands in every direction. It just expands. And so the expansive state, it'll hit things that trigger people on the right, like increased taxes in the welfare state and that kind of stuff. They'll get angry about that, rightfully so. Gun regulation, right? Massive regulation of businesses and you know, gun laws. They'll get all mad about that. But it also triggers things that people on the left would get pissed about. You get more, you know, drug laws, militarization of the police, endless wars everywhere. You start to get all of these things when the state gets large. And so I think the dirty little secret here is you can interpret this, you can take a subset of those things and adopt a Marxist ideology and say, these are the things we need to bring down the system because of Marxism. And you can list a whole bunch of things. And some of those things are valid because we can say, oh, the system's a fascist. These are fascists that are running things. And we need a Marxist revolution. And you can cite some examples of things that are problematic. By the way, I don't think the ICE thing is very problematic. I think if you're going to have a country, you need borders, but that's a separate issue. But you can cite a whole bunch of things. Some of those things we may not agree with, but some of them are kind of valid. And you can argue you need to attack the fascist state and have a revolution against the fascist state. But if you're on the other side of the aisle, extreme right, fascist right, you can look at the list of things and you can cherry pick a bunch of things that are socialist. And you can say, we need to stop these open borders. We need to stop the expansion of the welfare state. We need to stop, you know, this massive regulation and taxes and whatever. You can go after, stuff that the state has done that you disagree with because the state's expanded in every direction. And the truth is, you don't want revolutionaries from either of those groups. Right-wing revolutionaries, which we don't see as many of right now, probably because they're not supported by the media, but maybe if they were equally supported by the media, you'd see both sides. I don't know. But fascist right-wingers actual fascist right-wingers, we don't see a lot of them trying to firebomb facilities or whatever, although I guess there have been. I don't know where Timothy McVeigh stood. You maybe read his manifesto. Maybe he was a right-winger. I don't know. But you've got left-wingers doing this. The truth is, there's a grain of truth to both of their grievances.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lies in both of their grievances. And that makes it, I think it makes it difficult, because if it creates this general feeling that the problems that the state has created by expanding so intrusively and so much creates this general feeling of angst. It creates an us versus them mentality. It makes it seem like there's rulers and ruling class, and ruling over the proletariat. It makes it seem like there's different laws for people in power than there are for people out of power, which is true, not actually laws, but in reality, the how those are implemented and what actually happens, there is a different kind of, quote, justice. And so there's a lot of these problems that get, you end up with this hatred of the state, which is largely valid. And what happens is you can view that state through whatever lens you want. And neither the radical left nor the radical right are actually proposing getting rid of the real problem, which is the growing state. The radical right just wants a more totalitarian, controlling state. The radical left just wants a socialist, basically communist state. And at the end of the day, there's not that much of a difference between communism and fascism. They're both, the state basically controls your life in one way or another, right? In fascism, they kind of pretend you kind of have some pretend ownership of things, but the state can kind of tell you what to do and control. In communism, you don't even have pretend ownership. You just, it's not pretend anymore. You don't have ownership. But, my wife and I were talking about this, like, because she grew up in China. China was communist, but we had this discussion. It's really less communist now than it is fascist, right? They've kind of switched to, like, they realize that communism doesn't produce the economic activity that they need to build their economy. And so they kind of switched to this model of, like, we'll let you pretend to be free for a little while, but we're going to be authoritarian. And when you get big enough, we're going to step in and control you. That's much more like fascism than it is communism. They're really not that different, those two systems of government. They're not that unique from each other, but they're very different from how the U.S. was founded.
No, they're not that different. It's the same reason why I used to get, I see people argue all the time about how Hitler was a socialist. Have you seen this argument play out over and over?
I haven't seen it play out. I mean, he was a socialist.
Yes, he was a nationalist socialist, right? So I see people on the right and left arguing about that all the time. Was he right wing? Was he left wing? Was he right wing? Was he left wing? It doesn't really matter. I think too often people put things in these right and left binary, these categories, and it doesn't really matter. Does that make sense?
Think part of red pilling is realizing that the scale is not right and left, it's statism and non-statism.
That is the scale. Yes, I agree.
And so the other thing that this made me think of, I don't want to get paranoid, but look, if the left is going to get more and more armed and more active, there's something, I assume maybe radicals on the right are doing the same thing, I assume. And those of us who are getting back to the state and non-state scale there, those of us who are on the non-statist end of that scale, I don't know. Are we just sitting on our couches getting fat watching Netflix? Because that's not going to be very helpful moving forward. And I don't want to be a massive prepper or tell you that, you're going to be in a bloody civil war in your lifetime. But it would be nice to look. I know you shoot. I don't know if you still do. I used to shoot a lot. I used to train people in the defensive use of force. But I haven't been keeping up my skills. I haven't been doing martial arts like I used to. I've gotten pudgy and like old and let that kind of happen to me, and like the dad bod thing going on, right? And Now I'm actively trying to fix that because this kind of thing has been in the back of my mind, which is like, I think that we're going to have to actually be lean, mean fighting machines? No, not really, but it's good for your health anyway.
A sound body gives you a sound mind.
Yeah, I
Or it
don't
helps you
know.
have a sound mind.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't want to rule out that you may have to get involved in an altercation at some point. I mean, I don't think there's going to be an all-out bloody civil war, but as there is more and more social unrest, you know, society falls into a little bit more chaos, and a little bit more chaos means more crime, and you having to take care of yourself more than relying on the police. And, you know, we can use the Wild West analogy. Like, you know, I think the Wild West trope is, my understanding is the Wild West trope is hyperbolic, and it wasn't that much of a gunslinging West, but people were armed. It just wasn't as violent as the movies like to make it out. But, you know, if you can't walk around downtown without worrying about someone beating you up for a MAGA hat, or recognizing you, or, you know, someone doxes you for having the wrong opinion and people recognize you and go after you or whatever. Andy No wasn't wearing a MAGA hat. He was walking around being a journalist, got attacked. At some point, this is going to escalate to death. And it's not unreasonable to say you should be prepared for that.
So this makes me think of I've mentioned this blog entry before, but let's see if I can share my screen. Share. Can you see that?
I cannot. Oh,
can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes, you have shared this before.
Yes, this is a great blog entry. It's about I haven't actually read the book yet. This is on my list. Maybe we could put this on book club list too. Days of Rage by Brian Burrow. But the blog about it is Status 451 blog. I'm not even sure who this guy is, but this was going around for a while in January of 2017 because he kind of does a review of the book, but then he gets into a lot of predictions. He looks at like the radical actions of like the weathermen and stuff like that in the 1970s. And then he takes the stuff from the past and then he makes predictions about what's going to happen with violence in the future. He wrote this in January of 2017, and some of what he was predicting has already happened. So,
like what?
Well, he was kind of talking about how the left is going to get increasingly violent, but in groups. They typically get violent in groups, which we've seen, like Antifa, attacking people, attacking Andy No most recently. They do it in these anonymous masked mobs. Whereas he said on the right, you're going to see individuals on the right start to get radicalized. It's more like the lone wolf thing. And as these two things escalate, they're going to drive one another. But he sort of talks about how at a certain point there's going to be a flip on the right, where the right is going to get fed up with the violence on the left. Okay, so this is the part where it starts to get interesting about predictions. He says, the way I see it, domestic conflict in the US could operate in basically 4 stages. Number 1, a cold civil war. Number 2, targeted political violence, mostly short of murder. Number 3, political violence with murder as the default. And then number 4, civil war. He says, we're in stage 1 now, like a cold civil war. This is what I think it's kind of like what you call the cultural war that we're in. Stages 2 and 3 are what we're concerned with. The public.
We're already in 2.
I think we are in 2. He wrote this January 2017. That's why, I mean, some of this has already come true, because I think we're starting to see this targeted political violence, mostly short of murder.
Yep.
But he sort of says, look at this. The hard left selectively uses violence, normalizes it with weasel words, direct action, diversity of tactics, nonviolent property damage, Antifa. if you want to know why righties will get down with street fighting, he means like eventually, it comes to that. Take a look at Antifa.
Yeah.
So it's not a very hopeful outlook. He's sort of running through worst case scenarios. It's not, you're not going to read this and be like, oh, I'm looking forward to this. No, it's not something anyone's going to look forward to, but it's also sort of just, I appreciate people making predictions like this, because it gives me sort of a roadmap of like this is what we want to avoid. Like, are we going down this path? Because it looks like we are. Maybe we need to.
Yeah. No, I think we absolutely are going down the path. And, the K-selected response is to prep for it and, be ready just in case. Right? The R-selected response is to dismiss it and keep partying. And I'm suggesting that you activate your K-selected, genes.
Oh, this part, I've read this part before, but listen to this. He says, part of the bargain of civilization is ceding the authority to commit violence to the state. You're not going to like that, Carter, but he goes, it has its own problems, but it beats the alternative. Lord knows there are people I'd love to beat the shit out of in the street, but I don't get to do that, and neither do you. No, I don't give a flying F who they are. You don't get to do that. Lefties say, quote, well, that's Nazis. They only do that to Nazis. Nazis are different. You have to shut that shit down, etc. Great, except that lefties pull the same shut the shit down stuff on mainstream righties on college campuses, all the while calling them Nazis. Hell, lefties said that Ted Cruz was a Nazi, Mitt Romney was a Nazi, George W. Bush is a Nazi. I've done human rights work that had me working in proximity to the US military, so at a professional meeting, a lefty called me a Nazi. So if you tell me that I'm a Nazi and tell me that people I respect are Nazis and tell me you're in favor of going out and beating up Nazis, well, guess what? I'm suddenly very interested in the physical safety of Nazis, and I'm a Jewish person.
Right.
Right. Like, that's how people on the right are going to become more okay with like what he's saying with like the street violence and stuff that we see happening, because the street violence right now is all lefties, or mostly predominantly lefties.
I think we need to really, really consider the possibility that things are, even if it doesn't go to a civil war, I think things will definitely get more chaotic, and more chaos means you need to be more vigilant and able to protect yourself than normal. And yeah, I mean, do I disagree with the like part of civilization is giving the power to initiate force to the state? Yes and no. I do actually think that, first of all, it's honest to recognize that that's what the state is. That's an honest thing to say. Second of all, I think the idea of America, which was a small state that only would use that power to protect individual rights, was a huge, huge step forward, better than anything else. And as I've said before, even though I'm ultimately an anarcho-capitalist, I don't think anarchism survives unless you have a culture already of the non-aggression principle baked into culture. And so right now we don't have a culture where the non-aggression principle is baked into people's everyday lives. They don't operate that way. So until you operate that way, you can't actually, anarchy may very well be chaos with Antifa fighting, Richard Spencer and Nazis, and actually Antifa would fight everyone.
But didn't the non-aggression principle used to be baked into our lives? Like, I felt like we all agreed when you're sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. Like, we learned as children not to go out and hit people because we don't agree with them. And now we've forgotten that.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into philosophy. I mean, the issue is the non-aggression principle was never fully realized, and we didn't recognize. It's one thing to say we have a small government and we recognize that it's a violation of the non-aggression principle to have the government that we have, but we're going to slowly move towards less and less government over time so we can kind of get rid of that as people become, as free market solutions. This is agorism, right? Free market solutions kind of taking over the role of government in some way and kind of working towards that. We never really did that, and we never really we kind of like nodded at the non-aggression principle, but we dismissed the state as anything that they did didn't count as aggression, because we had these bogus ideas of like, well, it's a social contract and whatever. And like, we had things like the draft. I mean, even back when you're talking about it, there was no nostalgic, like in history, I can't think of a time in American history where there actually was in this kind of nostalgic, the state wasn't doing grossly horrible things, whether it was slavery or the draft or, wars that weren't justified. Then they introduced the income tax in the early 20th century, and that just and they slowly moved off the gold standard, which just enabled this massive expansion of government doing things. So there's not really been a time when we actually lived up to the ideals of the Constitution, which that's okay. I get it. Like, we didn't live up to the ideals, but those ideals were still noble. And, I think you could start with the kind of original Constitution, minus some obvious things like the allowance for slavery and that kind of stuff. But you could start with a version of the original Constitution and with the Bill of Rights, and have a society understand the premise behind them and start moving in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can't. Maybe every government always just grows into a fascist, totalitarian, or socialist totalitarian regime, right? That's the argument of anarchists, is that any government always grows into an uncontrollable behemoth. And I don't have a counter argument to that. I think that's because that's the example that we've seen throughout history with every freaking government. So maybe that's inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
It makes sense.
So that's depressing. But look, I'd rather live in a small, limited government than the direction we're heading. And I think a lot of people would, even people who don't want to go, who don't have anarcho-capitalism on their horizon ever, that's fine. They've got a more limited constitutional style government on the horizon. We're not going that direction. They're both the same direction, in my opinion, and we're not going in either one of those directions. So,
on that note, have a happy week, guys.
So move to an open carry state and go to the range every weekend.
You guys need to move to Texas and take Texas back. It's becoming California here.
That's why I'm not sure Texas is the rallying point, but
let's wrap it up. Let's land the plane.
All right. Thanks for supporting us. Like, share, do all that stuff.
Dear AI overlords at YouTube and Google, we offer up a sacrifice to your SJW sensibilities. Please don't delete our channel. Today's reading comes from my women's studies days in college. We shall be reading Scum Manifesto by Valerie Solanas. Look, we have the same feminist hat. Scum Manifesto. Life in this society being at best an utter bore, and no aspect of society being at all relevant to women, there remains to civic-minded, responsible, thrill-seeking females only to overthrow the government, eliminate the money system, institute complete automation, and destroy the male sex. It is now technically possible to reproduce without the aid of males, or, for that matter, females, and to produce only females. We must begin immediately to do so. Retaining the male has not even the dubious purpose of reproduction. The male is a biological accident. The Y, male gene, is an incomplete X, female gene. That is, has an incomplete set of chromosomes. In other words, the male is an incomplete female, a walking abortion, aborted at the gene stage. To be male is to be deficient, emotionally limited. Maleness is a deficiency disease, and males are emotional cripples. This has been a reading from Scum Manifesto by Valerie Solano.